Aloha. If you're one of my amazing 13 followers, you know that this channel and my 2 Instagram accounts mainly cover motorcycles and scenes from Hawaii. However, this summer I wanted to do something different because I had an amazing opportunity to travel abroad. Also, this was the first time I'd embarked on a week-long cruise. I learned so much preparing for the trip, I thought I'd make a series of travel videos sharing my experience. So let me tell you a little bit about our group. One thing that made this trip so special is that we had 3 generations of my family on the trip. My parents are in their late 80s. My wife, sister, and I are in our 50s. My sister's 2 boys and my younger son are all teenagers. 2 of our nieces joined us. They are both in their mid-20s. So we had a wide variety of ages, interests, and physical abilities on this trip. We sailed on the NCL Escape. I'll link a video in the description that gives an amazing overview of the ship, which was renovated just 2 years ago in 2022. The linked video does such a great job describing the ship, amenities, and activities that I won't add to it. But I will be happy to answer any questions regarding the Escape in the comments. So instead of focusing on the ship, I'd like to talk about what we did at each port of call. On screen now is a summary of our itinerary. We flew into Rome 2 days before our embarkation day. If you've been researching cruises or have been on one already, everyone says not to arrive the day before embarkation. You really do need to arrive 2 days before the cruise, just in case there are any problems arriving at your embarkation city. As proof that anything can happen, we spent 2 extra days flying home because of a delayed flight. Incidentally, this is also why buying travel insurance is an absolute must. I'll make a separate video detailing how we filed our claim. We spent this day touring Rome. We signed up for a small group skip-the-line tour of the Vatican Square museums, the Sistine Chapel, and St. Peter's Basilica. Even though these tours can be costly, I think they are worth it. We started our tour at 8 a.m. and the line was already forming around the walls of Vatican City. However, because we purchased tour tickets, we went to the front of the line at each location. Also, since we had 10 people, we were considered a small group, so we had our own tour guide. Having our own guide was certainly worth it for the convenience and educational aspect. Finally, from a security point of view, we were also able to avoid the crowds the entire morning, thus minimizing any chance of being pickpocketed or having our belongings snatched. I'll be making a separate video addressing personal security later. After our morning tour, we had just enough time for lunch before our tour of the Colosseum, Palatine Hill, and the Roman Forum. The Colosseum was even more chaotic than the Vatican by the time we arrived. So once again, I suggest taking a small group guided tour. I will say that the 2 tours made for an amazing day. However, if possible, I would recommend doing these tours on separate days. It's a lot to take in mentally, and physically, it is a lot of walking. I realized after editing that I summed up our experience in Rome as an amazing day. That's such an understatement that I wanted to take a moment to add to that. I found Rome to be overwhelmingly beautiful and a feast for the eyes. The ancient and Renaissance sculptures and artwork are amazing. I even found the colors of the modern buildings to be eye-catching. Finally, you can't help being awestruck by the Roman architectural achievements that have stood the test of time, like the Colosseum and the aqueducts that still provide water to the numerous fountains throughout the city. I now understand why they call Rome the Eternal City. In order to see more of Rome, we scheduled our embarkation time for 1:30. We had heard that if you want to avoid the crowds at the Spanish Steps and Trevi Fountain, you have to go quite early in the morning, which is what we did. We were able to get pretty good pictures at the steps, but by the time we got to the fountain, it was already starting to get crowded. And this was about 8 or 8:30 in the morning on a Wednesday morning. We had just enough time to also see the outside of the Pantheon before heading back to the hotel. Downtown Rome is about an hour and a half from the port at Civitavecchia. For safety and convenience, we arranged for 2 vans to pick us up at our hotel and take us to the port. You can also arrange a transfer from your hotel to the port through NCL if necessary, although I don't have any details on how to arrange that or what the cost would be. When we arrived at the terminal, there were hardly any passengers there, so we were able to get on board very quickly, and luckily our rooms were already ready for us. The ship didn't leave port until 7 p.m., which gave us a chance to eat lunch on board and then enjoy some onboard activities like the ropes course, gym, pool, hot tub, etc. Pompeii is a must-see for its cultural and historic significance. It is about an hour and a half from the port. If you search YouTube, there are videos that show you how to get to Pompeii from the port by train. Depending on how adventurous you are, that is an option. Just be mindful of your time. The train station is about a 30-minute walk from the terminal, and then the train ride is about an hour or so to the Pompeii entrance. Watch your belongings carefully in the train station and as you get in and out of the trains. This is where you're most likely to have stuff stolen. Also, keep in mind the train schedule to make sure that you can get back to port on time. You could definitely spend the entire day exploring Pompeii. However, touring the Amalfi Coast is also quite an experience. We chose to do an early morning, small group guided tour of Pompeii and then a driving tour around the Amalfi Coast. We once again opted for private travel for safety and convenience. We hired 2 drivers, each of whom had 5 passenger vans. They took us from the port to Pompeii, waited for 2.5 hours for us to complete our tour of Pompeii, then drove us to Sorrento and then Positano. They even arranged lunch for us at a hilltop restaurant in Positano overlooking the ocean. After lunch, they took us directly back to the port. I will say that we hit some unexpected traffic on the way back, so we were very tight on time getting back to the terminal. We made it with only 30 minutes to spare. So if you're interested in a similar experience, you may want to book it through NCL versus a private tour company. The port of call in Sicily is Messina. Messina is picturesque, but the main attraction is Taormina. It is a scenic 1-hour coastal drive from the port. If you haven't already arranged an excursion, there are plenty of drivers for hire right there at the dock. Now, ironically, this was the one and only big group tour that we scheduled this trip, and unfortunately, we missed our bus. None of the drivers at the dock had a big enough van to carry us in one group, and the cost and effort of coordinating 2 cars last minute was a bit much. So we wound up missing Taormina, but it's a good excuse to make a return visit. Also, this is a good reminder to make sure to cover the cost of excursions in your travel insurance policy. The day was not wasted, however, as there is a 15-euro bus tour of the city that leads right across the street from the dock. The tour will take you to various historic spots within the city and only takes an hour or so to visit all stops. There's also plenty of eateries along the main road that runs parallel to the dock. After lunch, we spent the rest of the day enjoying the ship's amenities. There's at least one tour company on the island that offers hop-on, hop-off bus service with audio narration. Corfu is quite small, and if you don't get off the bus, you can complete all stops in about an hour or so. On this day, we wound up splitting up into 2 groups. My wife and I rode the hop-on, hop-off bus with my parents so we could see the entire island. We stopped at a lookout area and an old palace. The bus also stops at a couple of old forts. Those looked interesting, but we wound up not stopping there, mainly due to the heat. The last stop before the port was this little plaza that was very charming. There were little shops there where we bought souvenirs, and a couple of restaurants where we got some cold drinks. Meanwhile, the teenagers and my nieces were more interested in going to the beach versus riding the bus. My nieces figured out which stop of the on-off bus was closest to the beach they wanted to visit. Once we got to that stop, my sister took them and the boys to the beach via taxi. When they were done swimming, they took a taxi back to the dock. My recommendation would be to ride the bus so you can see the whole island and learn a little bit of its history via the audio narration. Decide in advance to stop at 2, maybe 3 locations, then spend the rest of the day relaxing at the beach. When the time comes, you can always take a cab back to the ship. The main attraction in Dubrovnik is Old Town, which perhaps doesn't need an introduction, especially for Game of Thrones fans. The city is ancient and absolutely breathtaking. This city and Pompeii were my favorite locations that we visited on this cruise. NCL offers transfers to and from the dock to the Pile Gate, which is just outside the walls of Old Town. The cost is €20 per person, and the buses run back and forth at regular intervals. We took a small guided tour of the city with another family of 3. But there's a really good information center at the Pile Gate. They have free maps of Old Town, so you can take a self-guided tour if you don't make prior arrangements or would like the freedom to explore on your own. It's hard to describe just how beautiful the city is. After visiting Old Town, our excursion included a van ride to the highest point in Dubrovnik. From there, you can see Old Town and a small offshore island. There are a few things that I would add to a trip to Dubrovnik. First, I think I would opt for the cable car ride to the highest point versus the van ride. I think the cable car would offer a more panoramic view of Dubrovnik. Second, I would pay the extra euros to walk atop the city walls at Old Town. Finally, the island I mentioned previously was where Joffrey's wedding in Game of Thrones was held. There's also a Game of Thrones museum there that has the actual Iron Throne from the TV series. Had I known this in advance, I would have made arrangements to visit that island. The main attraction in Split is Diocletian's Palace. This is another ancient and wondrous structure. The palace was built as a retirement home for the Roman Emperor Diocletian. He is the only emperor in history to retire from the position. Once he abdicated his throne, he returned to Split, his hometown. Another interesting fact about the palace is that it has been continuously occupied throughout its history. Over the years, people built dwellings within the palace walls, so some of the interior properties are privately owned residences. The palace is open to the public, so you can tour it without a guide. However, I especially appreciated having a local archaeologist guide this excursion, given the long and rich history of the area. Our excursion included a bus tour of the surrounding area. Unlike other bus tours mentioned previously, there were no stops. We just drove by points of interest. Also, the narration was live versus pre-recorded. It was very interesting to learn how the withdrawal of Soviet support and Croatia's eventual independence had such a long-standing negative economic impact on the area. For me, that was the main takeaway from the bus tour. So if that type of modern history doesn't interest you, I'd say you'd be okay skipping the bus tour. On the morning of the final day of the cruise, the ship docked about 2 hours away from Venice Airport. Our flights didn't leave until the next morning, so we planned to make a quick visit to Venice. Here's how we arranged this logistically. NCL offers a €50 per person transfer fee from the dock to Marco Polo Airport. We all signed up for the transfer and a disembarkation time of 8:45 in the morning. Once we arrived at the airport, we took 2 vans to our hotel in Mestre. By the way, the bus did not have a toilet in it, and we did not stop, so plan accordingly. Mestre is centrally located between the airport and Venice. It's a 20-minute cab ride from the airport and then a 30-minute bus ride to the Piazzale Roma bus terminal, right by the Grand Canal. You do not need to purchase bus tickets in advance, nor do you need to have cash. The public buses we rode had tap-to-pay terminals. Since we were leaving early the next morning, we focused on seeing a few key spots: the Rialto Bridge, the Bridge of Sighs, and St. Mark's Square. If you're pressed for time on your visit, I suggest heading straight to St. Mark's Square. It's truly an immense, breathtaking beauty. Then take a water taxi back to the bus terminal and grab a snapshot of the Rialto Bridge on your way in. Well, that's the end of our cruise. For my family, though, it turned out that that was not the end of our adventure. As I mentioned earlier, we wound up having to travel 2 extra days to get back to Honolulu due to a delayed flight. But that's a story for another day. If you stayed till the end, I appreciate it. Please consider leaving a like, and please subscribe for more travel-related content. Aloha and mahalo.